what is so conspicuous with the talks in Moscow, both before and after the event, is the hostility and fear, I would say, on the part of the Kremlin of Europe. Because what they are frightened of, and I think this is really pertinent to this whole conversation, is that Europe, in its sort of, we'll get the best solution last after we've exhausted all the other really bad ones, will get its act together, will arm, will confront NATO, and unless the sanctions are lifted, and unless the crisis in infrastructure, but above all energy, can be relieved, by this time next year, it could be such a crisis that Putin will be gone.
Hello and welcome to Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. Now, on day 1,380 of Vladimir Putin's 10-day special military operation or full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and there's been yet another merry-go-round of talks and talk of peace deals and everything else. We're very fortunate to be talking to an old friend of the show, Robert Fox. Now, Robert's the defence editor at the Evening Standard and a defence commentator. Has been a journalist for over, do I say the number, 54 years, or is it 55 years now? And currently the Defence and Security Editor, foreign commentator, reviewer at the Evening Standard, and you're an honorary fellow strategic studies at Studies Institute at Exeter, an associate fellow for the Centre of Defence Studies at KCL, and of course commentator on all matters defence, geopolitics, and anything else. Robert, welcome back to Frontline.
Hello.
Now, nothing's going on at the moment, or lots is going on at the moment. March, and I've stolen this from another good friend of the show, George Barros. March 2025, Putin rejected a 30-day ceasefire agreed to by Ukraine and the United States. May 25, Putin rejects a 30-day ceasefire. July 25, Russia rejects Trump's 50-day deadline for ceasefire. December 25, we're in it now. Russia rejects or postpones or does something to US peace plan. How many more times do you think that Trump will let Putin do this?
I think Trump is quite distracted at the moment, and you look at the latest feeds from his meetings and cabinet meetings. I mean, he's struggled at times to stay awake. He's got things like Venezuela on his agenda, very much on his agenda. Slightly off the agenda, but should be on it, is Gaza and the war going on there. There are geopolitical things which are beginning to matters, which are beginning to play into his agenda, although he is not recognizing it in public, namely the Red Sea choke point, Russia moving in there, the contest over the ports there, and the dire state condition of hydrocarbon maritime traffic, which is going to become a big issue. I think he's easily distracted. I think, like all old men, speaking as one, he finds it difficult to, as they said of Gerald Ford, to do a lot of things at once, walk and chew gum. I think he's made a mistake immediately as we speak, talking of the talks in Moscow. He sent in the real estate boys. The real estate boys, by that I mean Witkoff and his son-in-law Kushner. They ain't delivering.
Yeah, well, they didn't deliver beforehand, apart from Russia's 28-point demand plan that they said was an American plan. And Witkoff has decided not to go and brief Zelensky, as seemed to have been agreed before he went off to Moscow. What do you make of that? And what do you make of the dynamics between Witkoff and Marco Rubio, who seem to dig the US administration out of the mire that was created when Witkoff brought this Russian 28-point plan and you presented it as the US plan?
Sorry, I'm in frivolous, cynical mode in my talk, but it is profound. Rubio, I think, is going to dig them into a lot of problem in Venezuela, in which he is deeply committed, of course, being given his background and his community. So Rubio was the one who told us all that we know, the emperor has no clothes, that the plan, the 28 plan, was a version, and I emphasize it was a version of what Lavrov, the foreign minister, who's now been elbowed aside temporarily, or at least elbowed aside from the TV cameras by the real estate boys. But Lavrov gave this plan, and it was really, we want a ceasefire, but really we want Ukraine just to exist, don't exist altogether, but to exist as a cipher. virtual neutrality, reduce the arms, no presence of NATO, who monitors the ceasefire, and so it goes on. And we've had a lot of rhetoric from Putin only over the last week about how we're really winning, we're getting big strategic victories at Pokrovsk. There is no satellite confirmation of that, by the way. They're in Pokrovsk, but to no strategic effect. That seems to be the thing at the moment. So there's a lot of shouting and carrying on, and we're going to win, and we're going to prosecute the war. Now let's start from that position, because there are ominous things going on. And if you'll give me the space, I'll try and make, which you should never do in a broadcast, by the way, I'll give you a list of the immediate thing, and in no particular order. It's the late great Sir Michael Quinlan, one of the last great defence permanent undersecretaries, would say. Now, first of all, let's start off with the Black Sea, the tankers, and the oil. This is very serious. Ukraine has virtually knocked Russia out of the Black Sea for maritime commerce, particularly, though. I think grain could probably slip in and out, but oil and hydrocarbons. The sign of that was that they've sunk, by my reckoning, or suddenly disappearing, in inverted commas, 4-5 tankers of the Shadow Fleet in the past 5 days. They've knocked out the two ports there, to the extent that we have Kazakhstan having to close the CPC, its company, the Caspian Petroleum Company's facility, its pipeline. It's down. That's reckoned to be 1% of the total global output in hydrocarbon and oil. It's huge. And Kazakhstan is desperate, and it wants to sue Ukraine. Chance to be a fine thing. I have to go on with this point one, because it shows you where the war is going to go next, I suspect. It leaves Russia with only one warm water port all the year round, free of ice, to get its maritime commerce, at least from the western part of the country, out. And that is Kaliningrad. And where is Kaliningrad? Kaliningrad is a hostage enclave, because it relies on the Suwalki corridor for land contact, and that has to go between Latvia, Lithuania, and of course, and Poland, and into Belarus. You see how vulnerable it is.
And it's part of the NATO Sea, or the Baltic Sea.
Yeah, and it also means that the commercial ports, which have not been doing too well around Petersburg, are vulnerable. That is going to be the next phase of the war. Now, I want to go back to the 28-point plan, because why I said it isn't quite what Russia was demanding, as appeared at first in the Istanbul talks, rambling talks that seemed to be on off in April 22. I go back there, which Lavrov, as foreign minister, reproduced in the Alaska summit on the 15th. It's why it founded, because the Lavrov, that is the foreign ministry team, produced the talking points from Istanbul. It was in the press pack, apparently, in English translation, if you could find it. This is according to Foreign Policy magazine. And it was saying, we want this and that. Now, why am I saying that the 28-point is, and I'm not being pedantic here, why it was different, it was his emphasis on deals, hydrocarbons, paying America, JVs, and Boulder's brass standing there, and particularly when you get somebody like Dmitriev involved with Witkoff, let's go exploit the Arctic together. As one of the 28 points is exploiting the Arctic together. And so it is a real estate ripoff. No, I shouldn't have said ripoff, but it really is. Now that leads to my point 3, if I could do it. What was so conspicuous about the body language and the play out from the 28 points was America negotiating and being the arbitrator, and with Donald J. Trump possibly being the chair, the president of a peace board. And he was arbitrating between Russia, not necessarily Ukraine so much as he was arbitrating against European NATO. So there you have the leading ally in NATO, and this is the crisis now. It is one of the biggest crises in the whole history of NATO, if not the biggest. You have the lead player saying, I'm not really part of it. And this is where they are ganging up, and I think that that's what's happened in the talks, where you don't have people like Lavrov or Medvedev or necessarily people like Boroshnik, the head of the FSB and of the security services. Uh, uh, what you have is you have the money man, the new generations. You have Witkoff, who's always been around, Ushikov, the foreign affairs advisor, Hardman, and Dmitriev, against Kushner and Witkoff. This is a very odd way to do diplomacy because they're not necessarily professional diplomats, almost any of them, with the exception of Ushikov. But certainly Dmitriev isn't. I mean, he's a carpetbagger who's partly Ukrainian, partly Russian, who's happens to have taken a few classes at Stanford and Harvard. So what I'm saying is that what is so conspicuous with the talks in Moscow, both before and after the event, is the hostility and fear, I would say, on the part of the Kremlin of Europe. Because what they are frightened of, and I think this is really pertinent to this whole conversation, is that Europe, in its sort of, we'll get the best solution last after we've exhausted all the other really bad ones, will get its act together, will arm, will confront NATO, and unless the sanctions are lifted, and unless the crisis in infrastructure, but above all energy, can be relieved, by this time next year, it could be such a crisis that Putin will be gone, which is a big thing to be made. So it is crisis and crunch. I think the weak point is Zelensky and Ukraine is in a terrible position. Of course, it's not only the scandal; they're exhausted. They're talking about let's give up. They're punch drunk on the front lines, and that is the weakness. And it's holding the line. Why they have to hold the line? Because it's no longer just about Ukraine. And I think that this is where the European governments, the Biden administration, can be held to account, because it is a confrontation between NATO, Europe, and NATO, which Putin always wanted it to be, and Russia now. And the cat's paw, the casus belli, the occasion, as it were, is Ukraine. And it may not be Ukraine for much longer. It could be the Baltics. It could even be the Balkans.
Yeah. Well, today is a big NATO meeting, and for the first time in, I think, over 20 years, there's not going to be someone occupying the United States chair at the meeting, where you'd expect Marco Rubio, because it's the meeting of all the foreign ministers. And Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, on Fox News last night, turned around and said, now Putin has started making incursions into NATO borders. One thing I can tell you is the US is not going to get involved with any troops, but we will still sell weapons to the Europeans. Does this mean NATO has effectively, or NATO with the United States as part of it, effectively gone?
Well, do you remember Churchill's consigliere, appropriately named Pug Ismay, who was one of the first really senior, really an architect of an architect, obviously not the architect of NATO, said rather nicely and pithily, it could be the grand old man himself. By that I mean Churchill, because there was an element of wit about it. What was NATO for? It was to keep the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in. All three have gone. Russia, and I think it was you, Philip, has always pointed out, if you really want to get into the psychobabble, geopolitical, almost otherworldly thinking, and there is that aspect to Putin's thinking, you have to go to Alexander Dugin, who is the ideologue. And what comes first is dominant in his thinking. It's not a concept. Well, it is a concept to him, but not to us. It's Russia. Whatever Russia wants, because it's about Russia and Russian greatness. So Russia can be great in any way that it wants, and we should be wary of that, because this is what the thing that wasn't taken into account, particularly over the two Minsk agreements, which they say might be a model for a ceasefire. I, by the way, don't think they are at all, because Russia kept its Russia card very close to itself. We will tell the Russian people, you, me, we, us, it's Russia. And where Russia goes, and you get the rambling pieces from Putin, the speech in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference. These are the documents that you really have to look at. And the July 21, the year before the invasion, about where Ukraine and Russia sit, and Ukraine is part of the Great Russian mission. I mean, how dare it pretend to be something different? It's part of Russia. Can I just sum up? It's part for Putin, and he means it seriously. It's part of the founding myth. It is, and that's why it's. And this is where they are so unreliable, and you really have to make things. And this is where Rasmussen, the last Secretary General, but two of the of NATO, is right. You have to confront them with their own hard rhetoric. No, Europe has agreed to this. This is what Europe wants to do, and you confront it because, again, going back to the 28 points. There was the thing that was obviously cooked up by the trio, the Miami trio of Dmitriev. It wasn't Ushkov. This Dmitriev, Kushner, and Witkoff was well, of course, we'll get Ukraine. Odd concept for a democracy, however thin the democracy, to write into its constitution that in perpetuity it will never apply to join NATO or become part of NATO. Equally, drawing a breath, very theatrical this, they said, NATO, you read it, NATO in it, people like Kushner and Witkoff could do it. And it shows you how appallingly ignorant they are on this. They said, of course, right, NATO can write into its constitution, it will never admit Ukraine. Well, NATO, hey ho, it's a funny kind of democracy where whatever you want to do about who you admit on what credentials, it has to go to the NAC, and it goes and it has to go, and then from the NAC, of course, it comes up from the governments, but they are representatives of democratically elected.
And you and I have seen how the NAC, trying to get anything through the NAC, is like swimming against fast-flowing treacle uphill.
Yeah, but tell me, isn't it a funny thing? Sorry, if you want the commedia dell'arte, sorry, I'm being very Italian here, which is quite appropriate in this. The way NATO behaves, as I said, Rutte has been very, very diplomatic. I mean, he really could be in the lean and slippered diplomacy of the world of Machiavelli, for instance, the way that he's doing it. The Supreme Allied Commander, who is an American, has said nothing. What's next? A new hero, l'Ammiraglio Giuseppe Carvo Dragoni, who is chairman of the military committee, 68. And he says, look, this is serious. We've got to take Russia's execution and operation of hybrid warfare, for that is what it is, he says, seriously, and we mustn't be so reactive and passive and defensive about it. We've got to be proactive. He was talking about drones and underwater surveillance and sabotage. And it's very interesting. The admiral was the guy giving the leadership in NATO. I mean, this was over the weekend, very well reported in the FTN, many other things. Now you've got to decide what kind of alliance do you really want. It is very, very difficult for European NATO. And the guys, I think, and ladies, and the women are very, very strong on this, who are really probably doing the constructive thinking about it. Not necessarily in this order again, but certainly Macron takes it seriously. Certainly Metz takes it seriously. Certainly the Poles, despite their political division, take it seriously. The Finns take it seriously. And funny enough, Sanchez, who has been a low profile, is very worried and has said so in Spain, and so has Giorgia Meloni. The one major government now that is not saying anything sensible about this at all is Keir Starmer's.
And do you think that's going to change? We heard Putin yesterday turn around and say, give us assurances that he wasn't going to attack Europe, but say he was ready for war with Europe.
And the confrontation with Europe is part of the whole game. It's part of the whole rise of Putin, because that he didn't like the Budapest agreement guaranteeing the sovereignty of Ukraine, and it's really the betrayal, as he sees it, of the great legacy of Stalin and the Soviet Union. Not that he is a communist, a Marxist-Leninist, which makes this all extremely interesting. But the great betrayers are, of course, Gorbachev and Yeltsin. Although Yeltsin brought him to power, it's so interesting, that we were brought to such a sorry pass with the breakup of the Warsaw Pact, the difficulties with the Red Army, the Soviet army, which it still was till then. I mean, these are absolutely idée fixe. They are, to the extent, I don't know whether you'd agree, Philip, I think of obsessions.
Yes. Oh no, I agree completely. The complete obsessions, and we forget about where Putin had his founding years, through that whole period of time, and that is what has set effectively the foundations in where he's trying to develop his policies now and his ambitions, and he's become fixated on it in an emotional way, and therefore logic doesn't apply.
Yeah, it's very emotional. It's this idea of Russia, because one of the great debates about, is Western liberal democracy in decline? Can it regenerate itself? The thing that it really revolves over, and it'll come up very, very much next year in America with the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and then, by the way, even more when you get the anniversary of the Constitution. Why do I say that? Because you get we the people. Who are the people? Do we really represent the people? You don't get Trump saying we the people, and oddly, for all his deep emotional feeling about Russia, you don't get we the Russian people from Putin. It's an abstract to
Dictators
him.
very rarely think of their own people; they think of themselves.
That's exactly, that the evolution of parliamentary politics. You get the French Revolution and so on, but you get, you can never imagine, I stand for the middle and lower sort of people, which is what John Wilkes would say. Starmer gets close to it in his own bizarre North London way, in that he talks about the working class as if he and Rachel Reeves are scions of representatives in geo-economic terms of the working class.
Well, I'm nowhere near in his multi-million-pound league, so I'm clearly lower than lower working class.
That's right. But in their perspective, I won't go where I live, but I have a great deal of difficulty with this government because I'm very much lower class economically, but educationally posh. So I disqualify myself.
But getting back into Putin and all the rest of it, do you think with everything that's been going on over recent weeks, his 28-point plan came out just as Donald Trump seemed to be about to make a decision to give Tomahawk cruise missile support to Ukraine? I'll not say give the missiles because it needs the Americans. And Putin, he seems to have stopped that. He's derailed further oil sanctions. He's derailed the European plan to transfer frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. Possibly, we'll see. There's noises coming out different ways because Trump was talking about getting those assets and giving them back to Russia as soon as they signed any peace agreement. Is Putin sitting there?
In the agreement is lifting of sanctions, absolutely, and giving the money back, and development and JVs again.
Yeah, so is Putin sitting there behind his great big oak desk with a very large glass of vodka in best Russian crystal, with a big white cat on his knee, stroking it, going, "There we are, I'm winning this"?
I don't think so, for the reasons stated. Things, although they had one of the biggest gains of territory since the midsummer of 22. Gosh, I've got to get the month in October, and it has slowed down by the end of the last month. And by the way, I do look and listen to the Institute for the Study of War a lot.
They're very good.
They're very respect, because what they will tell you, it's your world, Philip, you understand it. They say what satellite interpretation can tell you and what it cannot. And it cannot tell you an awful lot. And the weather, I understand, at the end of October was absolutely dreadful, very bad for drones. Couldn't really see stuff. And the other thing, it took, sorry to quote a real old stager like Rupert Smith to mention, think Stalingrad again when Pokrovsk, the latest report, excellent piece from Dan Saber in The Guardian today. It's a wasteland. It's a strategic wasteland. You can't do anything in it. And it was because you went back to Stalingrad and Grozny with that, because as you know, it was direct fire weapons, line of sight fighting, and a lot of ducking and diving and hiding. As you know, when you do FIBUA, fighting in built up areas, it's got to be much looser, much more articulated. And it was really an absolutely sort of Mad Max hide and seek, deadly. They got there, but I don't think that they've done anything strategic to the extent that even they can't fully claim to have the whole of Donetsk Oblast, even, which he wanted by early mid-November, Putin. Putin is desperate to declare a victory, nor has it opened up, which they wanted, the access to the fault line of the Dnieper Valley, because that might open the prospect of yet another march on Kiev, which they're desperate about. Now, having said that, I'm going to move west. I think the really worrying thing is they're going to knock the hell. The Russians are going to use everything. The main point of effort, I think the main effort is now going to be on Odessa and the western ports. And they will use terrible tactics. You will see a lot of feints, like moving Oreshnik launchers into Belarus. I think and it's my usual line. I think there are too many, as with Trump's world diplomacy or world policy altogether, Putin is also finding it locally in Europe. Both have, for them, too many moving parts. There are too many moving parts of that, and I have no conviction that either is fully in control. Putin has the wonderful trick of seeming to be in charge by saying very, very little and getting in a quick jab. You know, you can have the flailing ones, the haymakers, and the left and the right hooks, then the quick jab to the solar plexus by always making the last comment, the last remark. And you know it's going to be picked up on Twitter. If it's picked up on the right channels of X, it goes out on the BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, and above all, Fox News.
He's a master at manipulating in the information domain. And this is something that I think when we properly look at the lessons of conflict, will come out as something we need to concentrate on more. But I think, Robert, we've come to the end of our time here. But what you've said is gives me hope that we're going to get lots more opportunities to discuss this. Unfortunately, I wish that we didn't, because it would mean that the conflict had finished and the killings wouldn't be there. But Robert, thank you very much indeed for talking to me today on Times Radio Frontline. You've been watching Times Radio Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. Now, if you want more on the war in Ukraine, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for membership to get you exclusive content and allow you to ask questions back to me. And remember, Frontline is also available in podcast form. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Times Radio Frontline.